Wouldn't someone like a Sean Carroll say, Professor Ellis, the Python example over here, which communicates to assembly code, which communicates to machine code. When we're saying that something happens at the Python level and it doesn't, or that has influence over the electron level, we're actually using a shorthand. We're calling it Python, but it's code, code in a different sense. It's code for electrons are doing so-and-so with semiconductors.
Yeah.
So if you actually look at what we mean, if someone was to say, well, what do you mean by thermostat? What do you mean by this and that causes so-and-so? We'll get down to some physical instantiation, and it's just physics in the end. That's the reductionist claim. All these, you made a decision to do so-and-so, it's because of your neurons, because of blah, 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 blah.
Well, if you say it's only physics, that's obviously false. If I tell you Maxwell's equations, okay, here's Maxwell's equations, so what does that do? It doesn't do anything. I give you Newton's laws of motion. Tell me what Newton's laws of motion will cause. It doesn't do anything. It only does something in a context, and the context is what decides what will happen. Physics by itself simply does not decide what happens. Physics enables it to happen, but it causes it to happen in the sense that it is told what to do. But the physics doesn't decide the outcome. The context decides the outcome. And now the thermostat is an extremely interesting example. Because a thermostat is a very simple system where you can see very clearly what happens. And it's a typical feedback system. You've got a sensor which determines the temperature. You've got a goal which you set on the thermostat. You would like the temperature to be 40 degrees and it's actually 20. You determine the difference, and then that difference sends a current round to a heater. The heater heats it up, and that makes it up. So this is a classic example of feedback. Determine what it is, find the difference, and take corrective action to make it correct. Now, this is a case of top-down action because this is all at the macroscopic scale. At the microscopic scale, what happens is that by turning at the macro scale the dial on the thermostat, at the micro scale, you cause molecules to move fast. So that's top-down action. The physics isn't determining what those temperatures should be. It's you who are determining it by setting it on the dial. And so it's a classic case of top-down action. The physics is enabling it to happen. We are telling the physics what to do, and the physics does what we tell it to do. The physics isn't deciding anything. The physics is the servant, not the master.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're enjoying today's episode. If you're hungry for deeper dives into physics, AI, consciousness, philosophy, along with my personal reflections, you'll find it all on my Substack. Subscribers get first access to new episodes, new posts as well, behind-the-scenes insights, and the chance to be a part of a thriving community of like-minded pilgrimers. By joining, you'll directly be supporting my work and helping keep these conversations at the cutting edge. So click the link on screen here, hit subscribe, and let's keep pushing the boundaries of knowledge together. Thank you and enjoy the show. Just so you know, if you're listening, it's CurtJaimungal.org, CurtJaimungal.org.
I imagine a Sean Carroll, if I was to channel a Sean Carroll here, would say something like, firstly, you're a physical system. Now, of course, you can disagree with that, but all of what was just said would just still be accounted for by the microphysics, entailing the macrophysics. So that's, I imagine what Sean Carroll would say. I think he has an argument about that. I think you have arguments with him as well, but please, I'd like to hear.
The problem is very simple. Sean Carroll doesn't admit the downward causation takes place. No, that's simply wrong as a matter of fact. Downward causation does take place, and there's a variety of ways it takes place. It takes place by setting constraints on lower level variables, which many people have written about. And so a physical law would be of the form, a function of a constraint is an equation of the form a function of x equals a constant. And you change the constant, you change the constraint. Another very simplest one is a pendulum. And the pendulum, you've got a bob which swings, and the length of the bob determines on what orbit it is. And you can move it up and down, and you can get different rates of swinging. So that's a very simple constraint. The constraint is a macro level thing. It determines what those micro level particles that make up the bob do. And of course it's physics, but physics by itself enables it, but it's a technology that the physics is incorporated in, which decides what happens. And now the human brain is a very, very large hierarchical system, and it's a basic principle. Every very, very complex system is modular, hierarchical structure, and all of those words are important. And the clearest way you can see this is by talking to computer scientists, because computer scientists are the people who've actually built really, really complex systems. And they use those principles all of the time. So what the basic principle is, you've got a complex thing you want to do, and it's very, very complex, so you break it up into simpler things. And those are still very complex, so you break those into even simpler things, and you break them down until you have a very, very simple thing that can be done in a very simple way because it's now linear. And so then you then build those back up until you get the thing that you want to happen at the top. And so modular hierarchical structures, every living thing is a modular hierarchical structure. Every technological system, an aircraft, a motor car, the internet, they're all modular. Computer, they're all modular hierarchical structures. And every biological thing is a modular. So the basic principle for constructing complexity is modular hierarchical structures that are adaptive. And downward causation takes place in a couple of ways. One is by setting constraints, and another simple example is just an electric circuit with a battery and a light bulb and a switch. And you open the switch, you close the switch. And it allows the current to flow or it doesn't. And when the current flows, then electrons flow and so on. You are controlling what happens at the lower level. That's absolutely clearly top-down causation, no question about it. Now, the other way that top-down causation takes place is very interesting. Higher levels, you've got the higher levels made up of out of lower level entities. And what higher levels do in any complicated system is they create, modify, or destroy lower level elements. And that's the core of a huge amount of biology. Gene regulatory networks are there to create proteins. So the system as a whole, a gene regulatory network, is a very complicated thing which reacts to high level conditions, and it is built in such a way that it will generate proteins. Modifying them takes place all the time. And the classic example of that is developmental biology, in which you have a set of cells, and they're all basically the same to start with. And then in the fruit fly, for example, at different places, signals get sent, positional signals, which tell different genetic circuits to turn on and off at different places. And that creates all of the body plan of a fly, a mouse, and a human being. It's where we get our backbone from. And so that is... And what happens there is cells are changing their structure. Cells start off pluripotent. They can become anything. But these processes turn cells into specific things, into blood cells, neurons, and so on and so on. And so things are created, they're modified, and they are destroyed. And apoptosis is programmed cell death. And for instance, when our hands are developing, initially they're all joined together, and then the cells between are destroyed, and that enables our fingers to be separate from each other. And so these are three different kinds of things that take place, and they take place in physics as well, and in organizations. These principles are extremely general. There's an organization analogy for all of them. And the organization one is a very interesting one. An organization, let's say the Boeing Aircraft Company, is a huge modular hierarchical structure, very, very large. And what happens is, take, for example, the employees. There's a process for letting employees join the company, and you select who's going to join. That's the process of bringing in. Once they're members of the company, you train them. You train them into a specific task, and that means you're modifying them. By the time you've trained them, they're not the same as they were before you started training them. And then there's a process of assessment, and either they make the grade, in which case you keep them, or they don't, in which case you boot them out. And so this process of higher levels selecting what happens at lower levels, it happens in technology, it happens in biology, it happens in organizations. As I say, these are very, very general principles which apply across the board in truly complex systems. And there's not the slightest question that downward causation is taking place in any of these cases.